Yorkshire, England, spring of 1816. The rain fell in relentless sheets against the windows of Stanhope Hall, a Gothic manor that rose from the Yorkshire moors like a monument to past glories and present sorrows. Inside the library, where centuries of leather-bound volumes lined walls of dark oak, the air carried the scent of beeswax candles and damp wool, and something else, something colder that belonged to the atmosphere of the man, not the season. Georgiana Rose Fairmont stood before the massive mahogany desk, her traveling cloak still dripping onto the Aubusson carpet, and studied the man who would be her employer. Edmund Charles Thornfield, Marquis of Stanhope, did not look up from the documents before him. His quill scratched across parchment with mechanical precision, each stroke deliberate, controlled. At 34, he possessed the kind of austere handsomeness that might have been softened by warmth, but was instead rendered severe by perpetual coldness. Dark hair, graying at the temples, strong jaw, clenched, eyes that remained fixed upon his work as though she were merely another piece of furniture requiring inventory. 2 years ago, Georgiana had been daughter of Viscount Fairmont, mistress of a comfortable home in Kent, planning her debut season with all the naive optimism of a girl who believed the world was fair. Then her father had died, his investments revealed as fraudulent schemes. Creditors descended upon the estate like vultures, and everything had been stripped away. The house, the horses, the dresses, the future. She had gone to live with her aunt in a cottage that smelt of camphor and disappointment, serving as unpaid companion, cook, and nurse to a woman who never let her forget that charity had its price. When her aunt died 6 months ago, Georgiana found herself utterly alone, utterly without resources, and willing to accept what no lady of quality should ever consider: £20 per year to serve as companion and secretary to a man whose reputation for cruelty had reached even her aunt's isolated cottage. If stories of resilience against impossible odds move your heart, please subscribe and stay with us on this journey. What happens next will remind you that strength comes not from avoiding humiliation, but from rising after it. £20 per year, the wage of a scullery maid, not a viscount's daughter. But beggars, Georgiana had learned with bitter clarity, could not be choosers. The Marquis finally set down his quill. He did not invite her to sit. His eyes, when they met hers, were the color of winter slate and just as warm. "You are the Fairmont girl," he said. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with the same inflection one might use to identify a ledger entry. "I am Georgiana Fairmont, my lord," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Your father was a fool who destroyed his family through incompetence and greed." The words fell like blows. "I trust you have not inherited his talent for financial ruin." Georgiana's fingers tightened on her reticule, nails digging into her palms through the worn leather. Pride demanded she turn and leave. Pride demanded she defend her father's memory. But pride, she had learned, was a luxury she could no longer afford. "I have not, my lord." "Good." He leant back in his chair, studying her with the same clinical detachment he might show a horse at auction. "Your duties will be as follows. You will transcribe my correspondence each morning, beginning at 7 o'clock. You will organize my calendar, maintain my files, copy documents as required. You will speak only when I address you directly. You will not engage in idle conversation with the household staff. You will not leave the estate without my express permission. You will attend me whenever I require your services, regardless of the hour. Is this understood?" "Yes, my lord." "Your salary is £20 per annum, paid quarterly. You will be fined for errors. You will receive Sundays off after church services, provided your work is completed to my satisfaction. If you find these terms unacceptable, the door is behind you." Georgiana met his cold gaze directly. "The terms are perfectly clear, my lord." "Then we have an understanding." He pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward him. "Mrs. Aldridge, the housekeeper, will show you to your quarters. You begin tomorrow at 7. Do not be late." He had already returned to his work before she reached the door, dismissing her as completely as if she had ceased to exist. Mrs. Aldridge was a woman of 50, with iron-gray hair and an expression of permanent wariness, as though she had learned through hard experience to expect the worst and was rarely disappointed. She led Georgiana through corridors that smelt of lemon oil and old stone, past rooms that spoke of wealth administered without joy. "The master is not a patient man," Mrs. Aldridge said quietly as they climbed a narrow staircase to the 3rd floor. "He expects perfection. He tolerates no mistakes. I shall endeavor not to disappoint him." The housekeeper glanced back, something that might have been pity flickering across her features. "They all say that at first. You are the 5th secretary in 2 years, Miss Fairmont. The others all left in tears or fury." Georgiana inwardly assessed the risk, concluding her present desperation outweighed the immediate danger. "Then perhaps I shall be the exception." Perhaps. Mrs. Aldridge opened a door to reveal a small room tucked under the eaves. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single chair, a desk barely large enough for writing. The window overlooked the moors, where rain continued its assault on a landscape that seemed determined to mirror the bleakness of the house itself. "This is yours. Dinner is at 6 in the servants' hall. Breakfast at 6. The master expects you in the library at 7 precisely." After Mrs. Aldridge departed, Georgiana sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself precisely 5 minutes of despair. 5 minutes to mourn what she had been and acknowledge what she had become. Then she rose, unpacked her few possessions, and prepared herself for the battle ahead. Because that was what survival had become. A battle fought in inches, in swallowed pride, in dignity, maintained against all evidence that dignity no longer mattered. The first week at Stanhope Hall taught Georgiana more about human cruelty than she had learned in 25 years of relatively sheltered existence. The Marquis was not merely demanding, he was punishing. Every letter she transcribed was criticized. Her penmanship was illegible, though she had won prizes for her hand at finishing school. Her spelling was atrocious, though she had never misspelled a word in her life. Her ability to organize his calendar was compared unfavorably to that of a trained monkey. He would have her rewrite letters 5, 6, 7 times for infractions she could not identify. He would summon her at 11 at night to recopy documents because of invisible errors. He would stand over her shoulder, watching, waiting for mistakes, his presence a constant weight of judgment and contempt. "You call this correspondence?" he asked on the 3rd day, dropping her carefully transcribed letter onto the desk before her. "A child could do better." Again. "Yes, my lord. And this time, Miss Fairmont, remember that I pay you for competence. If you cannot manage even the simplest tasks, there are plenty of other desperate women who would happily take your place." She rewrote the letter. He found fault again. She rewrote it again, and again, until her hand cramped and her eyes burnt, and she wanted to throw the accursed paper in his face and tell him exactly what he could do with his £20 per year. But she did not, because she had nowhere else to go, because £20 was better than nothing, because survival meant swallowing rage and continuing to breathe. The other servants watched her with a mixture of sympathy and resignation. They had seen this play before, knew how it ended. The master destroyed the spirits of all who served him eventually. It was only a matter of time. On the 4th day, Georgiana encountered the Marquis's son. She had been sent to retrieve a book from the east drawing room and found a small figure huddled in the window seat, so still she almost missed him. A boy of 8, dressed in somber gray, his dark hair neatly combed, his posture rigid. He did not look up when she entered, did not acknowledge her presence in any way. "Good morning," Georgiana said softly. The boy flinched. His eyes darted to her, then away, filled with something that made her heart contract. Fear. A child of 8 should not look at adults with that particular kind of fear. "I am Miss Fairmont." she continued gently. "I work for your father. You must be Lord Henry." He nodded once, sharply, then returned his gaze to the window. "May I ask what you are reading?" For a long moment, she thought he would not answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Nothing, miss. I am not permitted to read during lessons hours." "But surely it is past lessons time now." "I am being punished, miss, for making noise during breakfast." Georgiana moved closer, careful to make no sudden movements. "What sort of noise?" "I laughed, miss." His small hands clenched on his lap. "At something nurse said. It was inappropriate." A child punished for laughing. Georgiana felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. "I see. And how long must you sit here?" "Until father says I may leave, miss, usually until supper." She should leave, should return to her duties and not interfere in matters that did not concern her. But she looked at this child, this terrified little boy who had learnt not to laugh, and something in her rebelled against the tyranny that had made him this way. "Well," she said, sitting down near him but not too close, "I shall sit with you a while, if you do not mind the company. I have no particular fondness for being alone myself." Henry looked at her with surprise so pure it was heartbreaking. "You would do that?" "I would. Though we must be quiet, of course, since you are being punished. We shall simply sit here together in solidarity and contemplate the rain." The faintest ghost of a smile touched the boy's lips, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. But she had not imagined it. And for the first time since arriving at Stanhope Hall, Georgiana felt that perhaps her presence here served some purpose beyond her own survival. Over the following days, she found excuses to encounter Henry, a book left in the library, a question about the gardens. Each time she would sit with him, speaking quietly about inconsequential things, asking his opinions, treating him not as a prisoner of his father's regime, but as a person whose thoughts mattered. And slowly, carefully, Henry began to emerge from his shell. Not openly, not where his father might see, but in stolen moments when Georgiana would find him in the library, or the music room, or the conservatory. He would smile sometimes. He would ask questions. He would occasionally laugh quietly at something she said, then immediately look terrified, as though he had committed a grievous sin. "Your father loves you very much," Georgiana told him one afternoon, as they sat in the conservatory, surrounded by orchids that bloomed despite the bleakness of their surroundings. "He simply does not know how to show it." Henry looked at her with eyes far too old for his years. "Papa does not love anyone, Miss Fairmont. Mama died, and Papa died with her. He just forgot to stop walking around." The words, delivered in that small, matter-of-fact voice, struck Georgiana like a physical blow, because she saw, suddenly, what she had been too consumed with her own survival to notice clearly before. The Marquis was not merely cruel. He was a man shattered by grief and guilt into something sharp and dangerous to everyone around him, most especially to his own child. But understanding did not excuse, and knowing a man was wounded did not obligate one to bleed for him. The second week concluded, and that was when everything changed. Georgiana had discovered something during her nightly hours alone in the library, when she was supposedly organizing files, but was actually teaching herself the intricacies of estate management through careful study of the Marquis's ledgers. The man was brilliant at finance, that much was clear. His investments were sound, his property management generally exemplary. But there was something wrong with the accounts from the northern properties. Georgiana initially studied the accounts as an intellectual exercise. Soon she noticed minor discrepancies that would be easy to overlook, repairs that seemed excessive, payments to vendors whose names appeared with suspicious frequency. She began to investigate more carefully, cross-referencing entries, checking dates, following the trail of money with the methodical patience her father had taught her before his world collapsed. And slowly, damningly, a pattern emerged. The estate manager for the northern properties, a man named Silas Wickham, who dined at Stanhope Hall every other week, was stealing. Not dramatically, not obviously, but consistently and cleverly. False repair invoices, inflated costs, vendor payments that went to accounts Wickham controlled. Over the past 4 years, he had embezzled nearly £8,000, hidden in plain sight among legitimate expenses, protected by the Marquis's grief-induced inattention to details beneath his notice. Georgiana lingered in the library as midnight struck, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, and made a decision that would alter everything. She would document everything. She would create an irrefutable case. And then she would leave this accursed house and this cruel man. But she would leave him with the truth he had been too blind to see. Not as a gift, but as a weapon. Proof that his tyranny had cost him far more than the fear of his subordinates. It had cost him £8,000 and nearly cost him his son's soul. She worked through the night, copying documents, organizing evidence, writing a detailed summary that even the most obstinate man could not dismiss. As dawn broke over the moors, Georgiana sealed her work in a leather portfolio and prepared for the day ahead, knowing it would be her last at Stanhope Hall. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. She found Henry in the garden that afternoon, attempting to fly a kite in the weak spring sunshine. The boy was laughing, actually laughing, as the wind caught the fabric and it soared against the bruised spring sky. Georgiana had never seen him so unguarded, so completely and perfectly a child. She joined him without thinking, helping to manage the string, sharing his delight as the kite danced against the clouds. They were so absorbed in the moment that neither noticed the figure approaching until a voice like winter cut through the afternoon air. What exactly is the meaning of this? Georgiana turned to find the Marquis standing 10 feet away, his expression thunderous. Henry's laughter died instantly. The boy's face went white, the kite forgotten, as terror flooded back into his features. "My lord," Georgiana began, but he cut her off with a gesture. "I was not addressing you." His eyes remained fixed on his son. "Henry, inside, now." "Father, I said now." The boy ran, leaving the kite to tumble into the grass. Georgiana watched him flee, then turned back to face the Marquis's fury. "You were hired to work, Miss Fairmont, not to waste time on frivolous pursuits. My son does not require your attention or your misplaced compassion." Her carefully managed composure finally gave way. "Your son requires exactly what I was giving him," she said clearly. "Kindness, joy, a moment of childhood not poisoned by fear. He is 8 years old, my lord, and he is terrified of you." The Marquis's face darkened dangerously. "You forget yourself, Miss Fairmont, and your place." "My place? My place is that of a human being witnessing a child suffer. Your son does not need your tyranny, my lord. He needs a father." "How dare you?" "How dare I tell the truth? How dare I suggest that perhaps your grief does not excuse your cruelty? How dare I notice that you have spent 4 years punishing everyone around you, most especially an innocent child who has done nothing but love you despite every reason not to?" The Marquis took a step forward, his fury palpable. "You have crossed every acceptable line. You are dismissed. Immediately. Pack your belongings and leave my property before nightfall." Georgiana reached into her pocket and withdrew a sealed letter. Her hand did not shake. "I am afraid you cannot dismiss me, my lord." "I beg your pardon?" "You cannot dismiss me because I resigned yesterday evening. This letter, addressed to your solicitor, Mr. Aldridge, contains my formal notice of resignation, effective immediately. I sent a copy by afternoon post. This is your courtesy copy." She watched the color drain from his face, watched understanding strike him like a physical blow. She had beaten him to it. She had walked away before he could throw her out. She had claimed the last shred of power available to her, the power to choose her own departure. You dare— "Oh, I dare considerably more than that, my lord." She withdrew the leather portfolio from where she had concealed it in her cloak. "Before I leave your employment, I thought you might appreciate a small parting gift. These documents prove that your estate manager, Mr. Silas Wickham, has been systematically stealing from you for the past 4 years, £8,000 to be precise. I have documented everything: false repair invoices, inflated costs, payments to vendors who exist only on paper, duplicate billing. It is all here, organized by date and property, with copies of every relevant ledger entry and receipt." She dropped the portfolio onto the stone bench beside them. "You were so occupied with making everyone around you miserable that you failed to notice the actual thief dining at your table twice monthly, complimenting your wine while robbing you blind." The Marquis stood frozen, his face now ashen. Georgiana felt a savage satisfaction at penetrating his armor at last, at forcing him to feel even a fraction of what he had inflicted on others. But she was not finished. "And while we are speaking uncomfortable truths, my lord, you should know something about your son. Henry told me last week that he prays every night. Do you know what he prays for? He prays that you will die, because, and I quote, 'Then the house would be happy again.' Congratulations, Lord Stanhope. You have terrorized an 8-year-old child to the point where he wishes for his own father's death. What a magnificent legacy. What a triumph of parenting." She saw the words strike home, saw something crack in that carefully controlled facade. Good. Let him feel it. Let him understand what he had become. "I shall see myself out," Georgiana continued, gathering her cloak around her. "Good luck finding someone else willing to endure your particular brand of tyranny for £20 per year. Oh, and I took the liberty of sending copies of the financial documents to your solicitor as well. Mr. Wickham should be arrested within the week. You are welcome." She walked away without looking back, her spine straight, her head high, leaving the Marquis standing alone in the garden with his kite and his sins. The door to Stanhope Hall closed behind her with a satisfying firmness. Mrs. Aldridge, who had clearly been listening, pressed a small package into her hands. "Food for the journey, miss. And this." A small purse, heavier than it should be. The staff took up a collection. "You are the first to stand up to him. The first to defend young Lord Henry. We wanted you to know that it mattered." Georgiana felt tears sting her eyes, the first tears she had allowed since her father's death. "Thank you," she whispered. "Where will you go, miss?" "London. I have a cousin who works in a dressmaker's shop. She might find me a position." Mrs. Aldridge nodded, her expression sad. "God go with you, Miss Fairmont, and thank you for what you tried to do for the boy." The hired carriage that would take Georgiana to the coaching inn waited in the drive. She climbed inside without allowing herself to look back at the Gothic pile of stone that had been her prison for 2 weeks. As the horses pulled away, she told herself that she felt nothing but relief. She did not question why relief felt suspiciously like grief. Edmund Charles Thornfield stood in the garden for precisely 10 minutes after Georgiana Fairmont departed. He stood perfectly still, the leather portfolio in his hands, the words she had spoken echoing in his mind with the persistence of church bells. "Your son prays for your death." He had thought himself beyond pain, beyond the reach of words that might wound. He had spent 4 years building walls around what remained of his heart, brick by brick, insult by calculated insult, using cruelty as mortar. He had convinced himself that his severity was discipline, that his coldness was strength, that his son needed correction more than affection. He had been wrong, catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. Edmund internally acknowledged the necessity of seeing her face to face. No letter or payment could convey the depth of his regret and the scale of her impact. Edmund walked slowly back into Stanhope Hall. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, where Henry's room overlooked the moors. He knocked, something he had never done before, and waited for permission to enter, something he had never granted his son. "Come in," came the small, frightened voice. Henry sat on his bed, his posture rigid, his hands folded in his lap, preparing for punishment, for more coldness, for another lesson in how affection was weakness and joy was inappropriate. 8 years old, and already so thoroughly broken that he could not imagine another outcome. Edmund closed the door behind him, and for the first time in 4 years, really looked at his son. Saw not a disappointing extension of himself requiring correction, but a child, his child. The last piece of the woman he had failed to love in life and mourned with useless guilt in death. A boy who looked like Arabella, who had her gentle nature and her capacity for joy, all of it crushed under the weight of his father's relentless disapproval. "Henry," he said, and his voice broke on the name. The boy flinched. "I am sorry, Father. I know I should not have been playing. I know it was wrong. I shall accept my punishment." Edmund crossed the room and did something he had not done since Arabella's funeral. He sat on the edge of his son's bed and reached for the small, trembling hands. "You have nothing to apologize for, Henry. Nothing. I am the one who must apologize. To you. For everything." Henry stared at him with such shock that Edmund felt shame burn through him like acid. When had his son learned to be surprised by kindness from his own father? "I have been cruel to you," Edmund continued, forcing the words past the constriction in his throat. "I have been cold and harsh and utterly wrong. I convinced myself that I was teaching you strength, but I was only teaching you fear. And I am so very, very sorry." Tears welled in Henry's eyes. "I confess, Father, I do not comprehend. Miss Fairmont told me something today, something that I desperately needed to hear, though I did not want to hear it. She told me that you pray for my death." The boy went white. "Father, I did not mean—" "Stop." Edmund squeezed the small hands gently. "Stop apologizing. If you wished me dead, you had cause. What I have done to you, Henry, what I have made you feel in your own home, is unforgivable. I was so consumed with my own pain, my own guilt at the loss of your mother, that I failed to see I was destroying the one person she loved most in this world, you." A sob broke from Henry's chest, then another. And then the child was crying in earnest, great heaving sobs that spoke of years of suppressed pain and fear. Edmund pulled his son into his arms and held him, feeling the small body shake against his chest, and wept with him. They stayed that way until the moon rose over the moors, until the tears ran dry and something new began to grow in the space where cruelty had reigned. It was not forgiveness, not yet. It was something more fragile. Hope. The possibility that what had been broken might, with time and effort and genuine change, be repaired. "I shall do better, Henry," Edmund whispered against his son's hair. "I swear to you, I shall be better. The father you deserved all along." "I do not want you to die, Father," Henry said, his voice muffled against Edmund's coat. "I just wanted you to love me." "I do love you. I always have. I simply forgot how to show it. But I am remembering now. Miss Fairmont reminded me." They talked through the night, Edmund listening to his son speak with a freedom and honesty the boy had never been permitted before. He learned about Henry's lessons, his interests, his fears, his dreams. He learned that his son wanted to study history and literature, that he loved horses and hated Latin, that he had nightmares about disappointing his father so thoroughly that he would be sent away. As dawn broke, Edmund made a silent vow. He would change, not just in how he treated his son, but in how he lived. Georgiana Fairmont had held up a mirror, and the reflection was monstrous. He would not, could not, remain that man. But first, he had business to attend to. The arrest of Silas Wickham occurred precisely as Georgiana had predicted. Mr. Aldridge, Edmund's solicitor, arrived within 2 days with magistrates in tow. The evidence was irrefutable. Wickham was taken into custody, protesting his innocence with the vehemence of the truly guilty. He would stand trial for fraud and embezzlement and would likely spend years in prison. Edmund read through Georgiana's documentation with mounting amazement. The work was meticulous, brilliant, and must have required countless hours of effort performed late at night when she should have been sleeping. She had done this not for reward, not for his gratitude, but simply because it was right, because she had seen corruption and could not let it stand. Who was this woman who had endured his cruelty with such dignity, who had defended his son at the cost of her position, who had left him not with revenge, but with the truth he desperately needed? Edmund spent 3 weeks changing everything he could reach. He raised the staff's wages. He apologized to servants he had mistreated. He reviewed estate policies with new eyes, seeing for the first time how his grief-fueled tyranny had created an atmosphere of fear throughout his properties. He dismissed managers who ruled through intimidation and promoted those who led with competence and kindness. He dedicated his days to Henry, rebuilding what he had broken, learning to be the father he should have been all along. Edmund discovered that his son was clever and kind and funny, all the things he might have known years ago if he had bothered to look. But through all of this, through all the changes and amends, one thought dominated his mind: Georgiana Fairmont. The woman who had saved him from himself, who had loved his son when Edmund had forgotten how, who had walked away with her dignity intact and left him with nothing but the ashes of his pride. He had to find her, had to apologize, had to, at the very least, ensure that she had not suffered too greatly for her courage. It took him 2 weeks to track her down. She had gone to London, as she had told Mrs. Aldridge, and found work in a dressmaker's shop in Spitalfields. But when Edmund's inquiry agent described the conditions, Edmund felt a chill run through him. 14-hour days in a workshop lit by smoking candles. £6 per year, barely enough to cover lodgings in a boarding house known for its bedbugs and dubious safety. Work that would ruin her hands and her health within years. Georgiana Fairmont, daughter of a viscount, educated and refined, was being destroyed by inches in a place that cared nothing for her quality or her courage. Edmund made arrangements and traveled to London immediately. The workshop was everything his agent had described, and worse. He found it in a narrow lane where the buildings leaned together like drunken conspirators, where the smell of refuse mixed with coal smoke, where children played in gutters and women hawked questionable wares from doorways. Inside, a dozen women sat hunched over work tables, stitching by the inadequate light of tallow candles. The air was thick with lint and exhaustion, and there, in the far corner, bent over a piece of lavender silk, was Georgiana. She had lost weight. Her face was thinner, shadows under her eyes speaking of too little sleep and insufficient food. Her hands moved with mechanical efficiency, stitching a hem with the same precision she had brought to his correspondence. But there was something extinguished in her bearing, a dimming of the fire that had confronted him in the garden at Stanhope Hall. Edmund felt rage rise in him, not at her, but at the world that reduced remarkable women to this, and at himself, for his part in driving her to it. "Miss Fairmont," he said quietly. Her hands stilled. She looked up slowly, as though she could not quite believe what she was hearing. When she saw him, shock flooded her features, followed quickly by wariness. "My lord." She set down her work and stood, her movements careful, controlled. "If you have come to seek restitution for time I did not complete in your service, I came to apologize." The words fell into the workshop's din and somehow created a pocket of silence around them. Georgiana stared at him as though he had begun speaking in tongues. "I beg your pardon? I came to London to apologize to you, Miss Fairmont, for my treatment of you during your time at Stanhope Hall, for my cruelty, for every humiliation I inflicted, every unkindness, every abuse of the power I held over someone who had no choice but to endure it." She continued to stare at him, her expression unreadable. The other women in the workshop had stopped working now, watching this exchange with fascination. "Perhaps we might speak somewhere more private," Edmund suggested. I do not have time for private conversations, my lord. I am paid by the piece, and every moment I spend not working is money I cannot afford to lose. The rebuke was gentle but firm. Edmund felt it strike home with the precision it deserved. Then I shall compensate your employer for your time. Please, give me 10 minutes. Georgiana studied him for a long moment, then nodded. She spoke to the severe woman who managed the workshop, who glared at Edmund but accepted his payment. Then Georgiana led him outside to a small courtyard behind the building, where weak sunlight struggled through London's perpetual haze. You wanted to speak with me, my lord. I am listening. In the face of her continued reserved dignity, the sophisticated words Edmund had prepared utterly failed him. You were right, he began, about everything, about Wickham, about my cruelty, most especially about Henry. I spent 4 years punishing the world for my guilt at the loss of Arabella, and in the process I nearly destroyed my son. You stopped me. Not gently, not with polite suggestions I could ignore, but with truth delivered like a slap. And it was exactly what I needed. Georgiana's expression softened slightly. How is Henry? Better. We are both better. I am trying to be the father he deserves. It is harder than I expected, learning to be kind after years of being cruel, but he is patient with me. More patient than I have earned. Children are resilient, my lord, and they want desperately to love their parents, even when their parents make it nearly impossible. Yes. Edmund took a breath. I had Wickham arrested. He will stand trial next month. The evidence you gathered was irrefutable. You saved me £8,000 and perhaps much more in future losses. I am glad the matter was resolved. Georgiana. He used her given name without thinking, saw her eyes widen at the familiarity. Miss Fairmont, I did not come here merely to apologize. I came because I cannot stop thinking about what you said to me. About what you did for Henry, for me, for the entire household. You were the only person courageous enough to tell me the truth. The only one who cared enough about a child you had known for 2 weeks to risk your position defending him. Any decent person would have done the same. But they did not. I employed 5 secretaries before you. None of them said a word about Henry's misery. None of them stood up to me. None of them gave me the gift of truth, even though that truth destroyed their employment. Georgiana looked away. I am not certain gift is the word I would use, my lord. I was angry. I said things that perhaps should have been delivered with more diplomacy. No. Edmund stepped closer. You said exactly what needed to be said, in exactly the way it needed to be said. Diplomacy had failed. Kindness had failed. I needed someone to shatter my delusions, and you did. But you are suffering for it, and that is unacceptable to me. I chose to speak, my lord. I accepted the consequences. Working 14 hours a day in this place for £6 per year is not a consequence you deserve. You should be... He stopped, realizing how presumptuous his next words would sound. Forgive me. I am not here to tell you what you should be. I am here to make you an offer. Wariness returned to her features. What sort of offer? I need a governess for Henry. Someone who can oversee his education, manage his schedule, ensure his well-being. Someone he already trusts and cares for. You demonstrated during your brief time at Stanhope Hall that you have a gift for connecting with him. He has asked about you repeatedly. He misses you. Georgiana's eyes softened at that, then hardened again. You want me to return to Stanhope Hall as Henry's governess? Yes, at £200 per year, with complete authority over his education and the management of the household as it pertains to his care. You would have comfortable quarters, adequate staff to support you, and my guarantee that you would be treated with the respect due your position and your person. £200, 10 times what he had paid her before. A fortune compared to her current wage. Edmund saw the calculation in her eyes, saw temptation war with suspicion. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why offer this to me?" "Because I was a monster to you, Miss Fairmont, and you deserve better. Because my son needs you. Because I need you, though not as a secretary. I need someone in my household who will tell me when I am wrong, who will not let me slide back into the cruelty that comes so easily to me, who will hold me accountable to the man I am trying to become. You want me to be your conscience. I want you to be Henry's governess, but yes, I would welcome your perspective on matters beyond his education. You have already proven yourself to be observant, intelligent, and courageous. Those are qualities I value." Georgiana was silent for a long moment. Edmund waited, barely breathing, aware that she held all the power now. She could refuse. She could walk away from him as decisively as she had walked away from Stanhope Hall. And he would deserve it. "Your treatment of me during my previous employment was unconscionable, my lord," she said finally. "It was. You humiliated me repeatedly, questioned my competence despite evidence to the contrary, and used your position to make me feel worthless. I did, all of that and more. I have no excuse, Miss Fairmont, only regret." She studied him with those clear eyes that seemed to see directly into his soul. Georgiana raised her chin, her gaze unwavering. "If I agree to this, if I return to Stanhope Hall, you need to understand something. I will not tolerate being treated as I was before. Not once. The first time you speak to me with contempt, the first time you attempt to humiliate me or undermine my authority with Henry, I will leave immediately. I do not care how much I am being paid. I do not care if it means returning to this workshop or something worse. I will not compromise my unbought spirit ever again." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because I am quite serious, my lord. I would rather starve than subject myself again to the treatment you inflicted. So if you are offering me this position because you pity me, or because you wish to assuage your guilt, or because you think I will be grateful enough to accept future abuse in exchange for better wages, then save us both the disappointment and withdraw your offer now." Admiration, sharp and dangerous, pierced Edmund's resolve. This woman, who had every reason to be broken by her circumstances, who would have been justified in accepting any offer simply to escape her current situation, stood before him and set terms. She demanded respect not as a favor, but as a right. She refused to compromise her dignity, even when compromise would have been understandable. She was magnificent. "I am not offering this position out of pity, Miss Fairmont, though I freely admit to feeling guilty about my treatment of you. I am offering it because you are the person best suited to care for my son, and because I believe your presence at Stanhope Hall will make us all better. I give you my word as a gentleman that I will treat you with the respect your position and your person deserve, and if I fail in that promise, I will not blame you for leaving." Georgiana searched his face for deception, for hidden motives, for any sign that this was another trap. Edmund held her gaze steadily, letting her see whatever she needed to see. Finally, she nodded. "Very well, my lord. I accept your offer. When would you like me to begin?" "Immediately, if possible. I have taken rooms at the Clarendon. You may stay there tonight in proper accommodations with a maid for propriety, and we will depart for Yorkshire tomorrow. I shall need to give notice to Mrs. Fletcher, the workshop owner." "Of course. Shall I accompany you?" "No, my lord. I shall handle it myself. Where shall I meet you?" Edmund gave her the address of his hotel, along with funds to cover a hackney cab and any immediate expenses. "I shall have rooms prepared for you. And Miss Fairmont, thank you for giving me another chance, for giving Henry another chance. I shall not squander it." She accepted the money with dignity, tucking it away. "See that you do not, my lord. I am not in the habit of making the same mistake twice." As she walked back into the workshop, Edmund stood in the courtyard and allowed himself a moment of pure relief. She had agreed. She was returning to Stanhope Hall, and this time he would not fail her. The journey back to Yorkshire took 3 days, during which Edmund and Georgiana existed in a state of cautious formality. They traveled in his well-appointed carriage with a maid for propriety, stopping at respectable inns along the way. Edmund treated Georgiana with scrupulous courtesy, addressing her as Miss Fairmont, consulting her preferences, ensuring her comfort. Georgiana watched him carefully, looking for cracks in the facade, for signs that the cruelty would resurface once they were away from London's witnesses. But he remained steadily, almost determinedly kind, not effusive, not overly familiar, simply respectful in a way that felt both foreign and right. They spoke of Henry, of his education, of the changes Edmund had implemented at Stanhope Hall. Georgiana offered opinions cautiously at first, then with growing confidence, as Edmund not only listened but asked for elaboration, genuinely interested in her perspective. By the time they arrived at Stanhope Hall on a golden afternoon in late spring, a guarded sense of possibility had settled between them. Henry met them in the entrance hall. When he saw Georgiana, his face transformed with joy so pure it made her heart clench. "Miss Fairmont, you came back. Father said you might, but I was afraid to hope." She knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. "I came back for you, Lord Henry. I could not bear the thought of you without someone to fly kites with." The boy threw his arms around her neck, and Georgiana held him close, blinking back tears. Over his shoulder, she met Edmund's gaze and saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Gratitude, yes. But also something warmer, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with employment arrangements. She released Henry quickly, standing and smoothing her skirts, suddenly flustered. "Now then, my lord, I understand you have been neglecting your Latin studies." Henry groaned dramatically. "Must we start with Latin?" "We must start with whatever your father and I determine is most beneficial, which, I am sorry to say, includes Latin." Edmund watched this exchange with something that looked suspiciously like contentment. "I shall leave you to settle in, Miss Fairmont. Mrs. Aldridge has prepared rooms for you in the East Wing, far more suitable than your previous accommodations. Dinner is at 7. Henry, you will show Miss Fairmont to her rooms and then leave her in peace to rest from the journey." "Yes, father." The chambers prepared for Georgiana were indeed far more suitable. A spacious bedroom, a private sitting room, even a small study for her work. The furniture was elegant, the appointments comfortable, the view over the gardens lovely. It was, she realized, the suite usually reserved for family, not for governesses. Mrs. Aldridge helped her unpack, chattering happily about the changes at Stanhope Hall, the improved atmosphere, the master's transformation. "We did not think it possible, miss, begging your pardon. But he is like a different man, still exacting in his standards, still demanding excellence, but without the cruelty. He thanks the staff now for good work. He notices when we go beyond our duties. It is as though someone lifted a curse from the house." "I am glad to hear it, Mrs. Aldridge. It is thanks to you, miss. Everyone knows it was your words that changed him. You are something of a hero among the staff." Georgiana felt her cheeks warm. "I simply said what needed to be said. Lord Stanhope chose to listen. The credit belongs to him." But as she dressed for dinner that evening, she wondered, had Edmund truly changed? Or was this merely another performance, a temporary reformation that would fade once she was safely ensconced at Stanhope Hall with nowhere else to go? She would remain vigilant, would test him, carefully, looking for signs of the old cruelty. And at the first indication that the monster remained beneath the veneer of courtesy, she would leave. No matter the cost. Dinner that evening was a revelation. Henry sat with them. Something Edmund confided had not happened in years. The boy chattered enthusiastically about his day, about his plans for tomorrow, about the pony his father had promised him. Edmund listened attentively, asked questions, smiled at his son's enthusiasm. After dinner, they retired to the drawing room, where Henry played the pianoforte with more enthusiasm than skill. Edmund and Georgiana sat near the fire, watching the boy, And for the first time since her father's death, Georgiana felt something dangerous stir in her chest. Peace, the possibility of belonging, the ghost of a future that might contain more than mere survival. "He is happy," Edmund said quietly. "I had forgotten he could be happy." Children are remarkably resilient, my lord, when given even the smallest opening to hope. I do not deserve his forgiveness. I do not deserve yours either, for that matter. Georgiana considered this. Perhaps not, but forgiveness is not always about deserving, my lord. Sometimes it is simply about choosing to stop carrying the weight of anger. It is exhausting, being angry all the time. He turned to look at her, firelight catching in his eyes. "You have cause for anger, more than most." "I have cause for many things, my lord, anger among them, but I also have cause for gratitude. You gave me back my dignity when you could have simply forgotten me. That is not nothing. It is less than you deserve. Perhaps, but it is enough for now." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching Henry play, and Georgiana allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like if this became her life. Not as an employee, precisely, but as something more. Part of this small family that was learning to be whole again. But imagination was dangerous. Hope was dangerous. She had learned that lesson too well. Better to focus on the present, on the work before her, on ensuring Henry's happiness and maintaining her own boundaries. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm at Stanhope Hall. Georgiana devoted her mornings to Henry's education, discovering that the boy was bright and curious when not terrorized. She reorganized his curriculum, incorporating subjects that engaged his interests while maintaining the classical education expected of his station. Afternoons were for physical activities, riding, exploring the grounds, practicing archery. Georgiana insisted that Henry needed fresh air and exercise, and Edmund agreed readily, often joining them on their excursions. Evenings were family time, a concept that had been foreign to Stanhope Hall. They dined together, played games, read aloud. Henry bloomed under the attention, transforming from the silent, fearful child Georgiana had first met into a boisterous, affectionate boy who laughed easily and spoke his mind without terror. And Edmund changed too, though more subtly. The coldness melted gradually, replaced by warmth that seemed genuine. He consulted Georgiana on estate matters beyond Henry's education, valuing her insights on household management, tenant relations, charitable works. He implemented her suggestions, treated her opinions with respect, thanked her for her contributions. She waited for the facade to crack, waited for the cruelty to resurface. But weeks passed, then months, and the man who had once made her transcribe letters 7 times for invisible errors never once criticized her work, never once spoke to her with anything but courtesy and growing warmth. It was terrifying, because Georgiana recognized, with dawning alarm, that she was developing feelings for Edmund Thornfield. Not the desperate gratitude of a dependent toward a benefactor, but something deeper, something dangerous. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at Henry. She appreciated the strength in his hands when he helped her mount her horse. She found herself watching for him, listening for his voice, seeking his presence. This was foolish, suicidal. She was his employee, no matter how elevated her position. He was a marquis, and she was a ruined viscount's daughter working for wages. The gulf between them was uncrossable, and allowing herself to hope otherwise would only lead to pain. But hope, traitorous hope, refused to be silenced. The change in their relationship came from an unexpected quarter. It was July when Lady Thornfield arrived at Stanhope Hall. She was Edmund's late wife's younger sister, a woman of 30 with ambitions that far exceeded her circumstances. She had married a baronet, but her husband's estate was modest, and she resented living in what she considered genteel poverty, while her sister's widower controlled vast wealth. She arrived without invitation, sweeping into Stanhope Hall with her maid and enough luggage to suggest a lengthy stay. Edmund received her with cold politeness in the drawing room, with Georgiana present, as she often was now. "Charlotte," Edmund said, rising, "this is unexpected." "Brother." She kissed his cheek with precisely calibrated affection. "I was visiting friends in Yorkshire and could not possibly pass so close without calling on my dear nephew." Her eyes swept over Georgiana with the precision of a raptor identifying prey. "And who is this?" "Miss Georgiana Fairmont, Henry's governess." "Miss Fairmont, my sister-in-law, Lady Charlotte Thornfield." Charlotte's smile sharpened. "How delightful. Though I must say, Edmund, a governess seems rather informal in her arrangements here. Dining with the family? Sitting in the drawing room during calls? Most irregular." Georgiana felt the barb land, felt the deliberate attempt to put her in her place. She remained silent, allowing Edmund to respond. "Miss Fairmont is more than a governess, Charlotte. She is a valued member of our household, and she will be treated as such while you are here." Of course, of course." Charlotte settled into a chair as though she owned it. "I meant no offense. I simply notice these things, you understand. Society talks so, and I would hate for any scandal to attach to your name, Edmund, or to Henry's." The threat was delicate but unmistakable. "Behave as I expect, or I will make trouble." Edmund's face hardened slightly. "I am not concerned with society's opinions on how I manage my household." "Perhaps you should be, for Henry's sake, if not your own." The visit went downhill from there. Charlotte proceeded to insert herself into every aspect of Stanhope Hall's operations, questioning Georgiana's methods, criticizing Henry's education, suggesting changes to household management. She was never overtly rude, never quite crossed the line into open insult, but her meaning was always clear. Georgiana did not belong, and Charlotte would ensure everyone knew it. At dinner that evening, with Henry excused to the nursery, Charlotte launched her most direct attack. "I have been meaning to ask Miss Fairmont about your family." "Fairmont, you said? I knew a Viscount Fairmont, though he has been dead these several years. Any relation?" Georgiana set down her fork carefully. "He was my father, Lady Thornfield." "Was he?" Charlotte's eyebrows rose with theatrical surprise. "How extraordinary! I had heard his daughter was living in quite reduced circumstances after the unfortunate business with his investments. Such a scandal. But here you are, quite comfortably situated. How resourceful of you." The insult was clear. Georgiana had clawed her way up from ruin through questionable means. "My father made unwise investments based on fraudulent information," Georgiana said evenly. "He died before the extent of the deception became clear. Yes, my circumstances were reduced. I worked to support myself, as one does when alternatives are unavailable. And now you have found such a comfortable position here. Edmund is quite generous with his charity cases, I see." Edmund's hand tightened on his wine glass. "Charlotte, that is enough. I merely compliment your generosity, brother. Taking in a young woman of dubious connections, elevating her beyond her station, allowing her such freedom in your household. Some might question the propriety, but I am certain your intentions are entirely honorable." The insinuation hung in the air like smoke. Edmund stood, his chair scraping back sharply. "Miss Fairmont has been nothing but exemplary in her conduct and her work. Your insinuations are as inappropriate as they are false. If you cannot speak civilly to members of my household, perhaps you should reconsider the length of your stay." Charlotte's eyes glittered with malice. "Oh, Edmund, always so quick to defend your pets. I remember how you used to defend Arabella from criticism, and we both know how that ended." The room went silent. Edmund's face drained of color, and for a moment Georgiana saw the old coldness resurface, the rage that had once made him monstrous. But then he took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice was controlled. "You will not speak of Arabella in that manner. You will apologize to Miss Fairmont for your implications. And then you will retire for the evening, as I find I am no longer interested in your company. I will do no such thing. This woman has clearly bewitched you, Edmund. Can you not see how inappropriate this all is? A governess with the run of the house, dining with the family, traveling with you unchaperoned for all I know. Stop. The single word cracked like a whip. You will apologize, Charlotte, now. For a moment, Georgiana thought the woman would refuse. Then, perhaps sensing she had pushed too far, Charlotte turned to her with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. If I have offended Miss Fairmont, I apologize. I spoke thoughtlessly. It was the least sincere apology Georgiana had ever received, but she inclined her head. Thank you, Lady Thornfield. Charlotte stood, her movements sharp. I find I am quite fatigued from my journey. I shall retire early. Edmund, we will speak tomorrow about Henry's education. I have concerns. After she departed, silence filled the dining room. Edmund remained standing, his hands braced on the table, his breathing carefully controlled. I apologize for my sister-in-law, he said finally. She has always been poisonous, but I did not anticipate she would direct her venom at you. You do not need to apologize for her actions, my lord. I do, because her presence here creates discomfort for you, and that is unacceptable. He straightened, meeting her eyes. Georgiana, I need you to understand something. What Charlotte implied about my reasons for employing you, about the propriety of our arrangement, it is all malicious nonsense. I know that, my lord. Do you? Because I would not blame you if you had doubts. I brought you here from London. I gave you rooms in the family wing. I treat you as an equal rather than a subordinate. Any objective observer might question my motives. Georgiana rose from her chair, moving around the table to stand before him. Then it is fortunate that I am not an objective observer. I know why you brought me here. I see how you are with Henry, how you have changed. Whatever Lady Thornfield chooses to believe, I know the truth. Edmund looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. Gratitude, certainly. But also something else, something that made her heart race and her breath catch. What if, he said slowly, carefully, what if Charlotte is not entirely wrong? Georgiana froze. My lord? Not about bewitchment or impropriety, but about my regard for you. He took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, could see the pulse in his throat. I brought you back to Stanhope Hall for Henry. That was true. But as the weeks have passed, as I have watched you transform our home, transform my son, I have come to realize something. I did not just bring you back for Henry. I brought you back for myself. Edmund. His name emerged as barely a whisper. You could have hated me, Georgiana. You had every right to refuse my offer, to leave me to the consequences of my cruelty. But you gave me a second chance. You gave us all a second chance. And somewhere in these past months, I have developed feelings for you that go well beyond gratitude or professional respect. She should step back, should remind him of the impossibility of what he was suggesting, should protect herself from the inevitable pain of hoping for something that could never be. But she did none of those things. I thought I was imagining it, she whispered. The way you look at me sometimes, the way you seek my company. I told myself I was being foolish, that I was seeing what I wanted to see rather than what was truly there. You were not imagining anything. His strong, formerly severe hand rose to cup her face, his touch gentle, reverent. Georgiana, you are the bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You saw me at my worst and somehow found something worth saving. I do not deserve you. I know that. But I am selfish enough to want you anyway. This is madness, she said, even as she leant into his touch. You are a marquis. I am a governess with a ruined family name. Society would never accept it. To the devil with society's opinions. I have spent 4 years caring what society thinks, letting propriety and grief make me into someone unrecognizable. I will not let society's opinions cost me the first real happiness I have felt since Arabella died. He leant closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. But I will not press you if you do not feel the same. I will not use my position to coerce you into anything. If you wish only to remain as Henry's governess, I will respect that. I will never mention this conversation again. Georgiana laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. You are asking me if I feel the same. Edmund, I have been half in love with you for weeks. I have tried desperately not to be, told myself it was foolish and dangerous and impossible, but my heart has never been terribly good at following orders. His eyes blazed with something that stole her breath. Say that again. I love you, she whispered, feeling the tremor of impossible hope. Edmund kissed her then, his lips claiming hers with a hunger tempered by tenderness. Georgiana melted into him, her hands fisting in his coat, her entire being focused on the sensation of finally being held by someone who saw her, truly saw her, and loved what he found. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Edmund rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, Georgiana. Not because I need a governess for Henry, not because society expects it. Marry me because I love you and cannot imagine my life without you in it. Georgiana drew a long, steadying breath. Yes, she breathed. Yes, Edmund, I will marry you. They stood together in the dining room, wrapped in each other's arms, while outside the sun set over the Yorkshire moors and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside Stanhope Hall, something new was being born, not just love, but redemption. The possibility that broken things could be made whole, that cruelty could transform into kindness, that second chances, when taken seriously, could lead to happiness neither party thought possible. But their joy would not be won easily. Charlotte Thornfield had not finished making trouble. The news of Edmund's intention to marry Georgiana spread through Yorkshire society like wildfire, and the reaction was precisely as hostile as Georgiana had predicted. A marquis marrying his son's governess, marrying a woman whose father had died in financial scandal. Unthinkable, inappropriate, absolutely beyond the pale. Charlotte Thornfield ensured that the gossip reached every drawing room in the county. She painted Georgiana as a scheming opportunist who had seduced Edmund while he was vulnerable, taking advantage of his guilt over his son to worm her way into the family. She whispered about impropriety, about Georgiana's time living alone in London, about the suspicious speed with which she had gone from servant to intended marchioness. The invitations stopped. The calls ceased. A carriage belonging to the Duchess of Devonshire, an old family friend, was observed pointedly turning back at the gates. Stanhope Hall became an island, isolated by scandal. Georgiana watched it all with a mixture of sadness and anger. She had expected society's disapproval, but the viciousness surprised her. These people who had known Edmund for years, who had benefited from his wealth and status, turned on him the moment he chose happiness outside their narrow definitions of acceptability. Edmund's response was to withdraw entirely from society. If they would not accept Georgiana, he wanted nothing to do with them. But Georgiana saw the toll it took on him, the way his jaw tightened when yet another invitation was declined, the way his eyes darkened when Charlotte's latest rumor reached his ears. The breaking point came 6 weeks before their planned wedding. Edmund had organized a dinner party, inviting 30 of Yorkshire's most prominent families. It was to be their formal announcement, their way of presenting a united front to society and daring anyone to object openly. Most of the invitations had been declined with transparent excuses, but a handful of families accepted, whether from curiosity or genuine goodwill. Georgiana, preparing for the dinner, deliberately placed her small leather account book into her reticule. Prepared for battle, as always. The evening started well enough. Georgiana, dressed in a gown of deep sapphire silk that Edmund had commissioned for her, stood beside him in the entrance hall and greeted guests with quiet dignity. She felt their eyes on her, felt them assessing and judging, but she kept her spine straight and her head high. Lady Charlotte Thornfield arrived fashionably late, dressed in burgundy silk with garnets at her throat. Her smile was all malice. Dinner was an exercise in barely concealed tension. Conversation was stilted, loaded with innuendo. Georgiana felt like an animal on display, every word and gesture scrutinized for evidence of her unworthiness. It was during the dessert course that Charlotte struck. "Miss Fairmont," she said sweetly, her voice carrying across the table. "I must say, it must be quite gratifying to have risen so far in such a short time. From governess to marchioness. Quite the fairy tale." Georgiana set down her spoon carefully. "I am fortunate, yes." "Indeed. Though I wonder, what particular skills qualified you for such a dramatic elevation in status? Your education, your family connections, or perhaps other talents that are best not discussed in polite company?" The insult was naked now, the implication clear. Several guests gasped. Edmund half rose from his chair, his face thunderous. But Georgiana laid a gentle hand on his arm, staying him. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost conversational. "You raise an interesting question, Lady Thornfield. What skills have I brought to Stanhope Hall? Let me enumerate them for you. First, literacy, the ability to read and write with accuracy and speed. Second, mathematical competence, the capacity to manage accounts, identify discrepancies, prevent fraud. Third, discretion, the ability to keep confidences and protect those in my care." She paused, letting her words land. Apparently, these are skills in surprisingly short supply. Rare enough, in fact, that they are worth celebrating. Charlotte's face reddened. "I hardly think— Oh, but I have more to share." Georgiana reached into her reticule and withdrew a small leather notebook. She opened it deliberately, running her finger down the pages. "For example, I have documented 18 months of Lord Stanhope's household expenditures, including several curious entries. Regular payments of £50 monthly to Lady Charlotte Thornfield, purportedly for charitable purposes, £900 total." The color drained from Charlotte's face. Edmund leant forward, his expression sharp with interest. Georgiana continued, her voice still pleasant, as though discussing the weather. "I was curious about these charitable expenditures, so I made inquiries. It seems the charity in question is actually the Golden Crown, a gaming establishment in London. Lady Thornfield has lost approximately £1,200 there over the past 2 years. The discrepancy between the 900 received from Lord Stanhope's accounts and the 1,200 lost suggests additional sources of funding. Likely her husband's estate, though I have not investigated that particular matter." Silence filled the dining room. Charlotte sat frozen, her face now chalk white. Georgiana turned to Edmund. "I documented all of this shortly after my return to Stanhope Hall, my lord. I wanted to ensure that no one was taking advantage of your generosity or your grief. Lady Thornfield's requests for charitable donations struck me as suspicious, so I followed the money." She turned back to Charlotte with a smile that held no warmth. "Imagine my surprise when I discovered that charity, in your definition, means funding your gambling addiction while you simultaneously spread rumors about my character." One of the guests, Lord Westerly, cleared his throat. "Lady Thornfield, is this true?" Charlotte's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Then, with a shriek of fury, she stood so violently her chair toppled backward. "You scheming, vindictive harpy! How dare you investigate my private affairs? How dare you humiliate me in front of— "How dare I?" Georgiana interrupted, her voice cutting through the hysteria like a blade. "How dare you spread lies about me while stealing from your brother-in-law? How dare you question my character while concealing your own moral failings? How dare you attempt to destroy my reputation while your own is built on a foundation of deceit and avarice?" She stood as well, facing Charlotte across the table. "I have skills, Lady Thornfield, skills that include pattern recognition, financial analysis, and the courage to confront corruption when I find it. These are the skills that brought me to Lord Stanhope's attention. These are the skills that made me valuable to his household. And these are the skills that just exposed you as a thief and a liar in front of 30 witnesses." Edmund rose, his voice cold and final. "Charlotte, you will leave my house immediately. You will repay the £900 you have stolen with interest, and you will never set foot on my property or in my presence again. If you do, I will have you arrested for fraud." Charlotte looked around the table, seeking support, finding only shock and disapproval. Even those who had arrived skeptical of Georgiana were now viewing Charlotte with undisguised contempt. She had overplayed her hand spectacularly. "You will regret this," Charlotte hissed at Georgiana. "Both of you." "I doubt that very much," Edmund replied. "Now leave before I have you physically removed." Charlotte fled, her exit lacking any dignity, her maid scrambling to follow. The remaining guests sat in stunned silence. Then Lord Westerly began to laugh. It started as a chuckle and grew into a full-bodied guffaw. His wife joined him, then others, until the entire table was laughing at the spectacular downfall of a woman who had tried to destroy Georgiana and found herself destroyed instead. Lord Westerly raised his glass. "To Miss Fairmont, a woman of remarkable skills indeed. Stanhope, you are a fortunate man. I am very much aware, Westerly." The mood of the evening transformed after that. The remaining guests, their initial skepticism shattered by Charlotte's exposure, began to treat Georgiana with genuine respect. They asked about her plans for the wedding, about Henry's education, about her role at Stanhope Hall. They saw, perhaps for the first time, not a scheming governess, but a woman of intelligence, courage, and integrity. By the time the last guest departed, well past midnight, Edmund and Georgiana stood together in the entrance hall, exhausted but triumphant. "That was a complete and decisive victory," Edmund said, pulling her into his arms. "Absolutely magnificent. You destroyed her utterly." "She destroyed herself," Georgiana corrected. "I merely provided the evidence. Though I confess, I have been waiting for the right moment to reveal what I discovered. Her timing tonight was perfect." Edmund laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Remind me never to cross you, Miss Fairmont. You are terrifying when properly motivated." "I learned from the best, my lord. You taught me that truth, delivered at the right moment with sufficient evidence, is the most powerful weapon available." He kissed her then, thoroughly, and Georgiana thought that yes, she had learned from him. But she had also taught him. They had saved each other, in different ways, at different times, and together they had created something neither could have achieved alone. The wedding took place in September, in the chapel at Stanhope Hall. It was a small affair, attended by Henry, who served as best man with solemn pride, the household staff, and a select group of friends who had proven themselves loyal through the scandal. Georgiana wore ivory silk with Brussels lace, simple but elegant. Edmund wore his formal evening attire, his expression soft as he watched her walk toward him down the aisle. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Henry cheered loudly enough to make everyone laugh. Edmund kissed his new Marchioness with a tenderness that brought tears to more than one eye. And Georgiana felt, for the first time since her father's death, that she was home. But the story did not end there. 3 years passed, 3 years of happiness that Georgiana had once thought impossible. She and Edmund navigated their new life together with the same courage they had brought to their courtship. There were challenges, certainly. Society took time to fully accept their unconventional union. Some families never did. But gradually, as the Tun saw that Edmund and the Marchioness's marriage was based on genuine love and mutual respect, as they observed the transformation of Stanhope Hall from a place of sorrow to one of joy, resistance faded. The Marchioness gave birth to twin daughters in the 2nd year of their marriage, Rose and Lily, who bore the stamp of their mother's courage and their father's resolve. Henry, now 13 and thriving at Eton, wrote weekly letters full of affection for Mama Georgiana and his little sisters. The house that had once been silent as a tomb now rang with children's laughter, with music, with life. And then, one autumn morning, Charlotte Thornfield appeared at the servants' entrance of Stanhope Hall. She looked haggard, her once fine clothes now shabby, her face lined with bitterness and hardship. Her husband had divorced her after the scandal, and she had been living on a small pension, ostracized from the society she had once navigated with such confidence. Mrs. Aldridge brought news of her arrival to the Marchioness, who was in the nursery with the twins. "She is asking for employment, my lady, says she is desperate. I was going to send her away, but I thought you should know first." The Marchioness sat very still, processing this information. Charlotte Thornfield, who had tried to destroy her, was now begging for work in her household. The irony was almost painful. Edmund, who had been reading to Rose, looked up. "Whatever you decide, I will support. You owe her nothing." "I know." The Marchioness kissed her daughters' heads, then stood. "But perhaps that is precisely why I should see her. Because I owe her nothing, which means whatever I choose to do is genuinely my choice, not an obligation." She went down to the servants' entrance, where Charlotte waited with the hunched posture of someone who had learned humility the hard way. When she saw the Marchioness of Stanhope, dressed in a morning gown of soft gray with her daughter's laughter echoing from upstairs, Charlotte's face crumpled. "I do not expect forgiveness," Charlotte said, her voice hoarse. "I do not deserve it. But I am desperate, Lady Stanhope. I have nowhere else to go. If you have any work, anything at all, I would be grateful. I can clean, I can mend, I can—" "You can manage the still room," the Marchioness interrupted gently. "Mrs. Aldridge has been saying she needs assistance with preserves and medicines. The position pays £15 per year, with room and board, Sundays off after church. You will report directly to Mrs. Aldridge and will be expected to work as hard as any other member of staff. There will be no special treatment, no acknowledgement of your former status. Can you accept these terms?" Charlotte stared at her, tears streaming down her face. "Why? After everything I did to you, why would you offer me anything?" The Marchioness considered the question carefully. She thought about the girl she had been when she first arrived at Stanhope Hall, desperate and proud and terrified. She thought about Edmund's transformation, about the power of second chances, about the choice to break cycles of cruelty rather than perpetuate them. "Because I choose not to carry the burden of vengeance," the Marchioness said finally. "You taught me something valuable, Lady Thornfield. You taught me exactly how not to treat people when I have power over them. For that lesson, I am grateful. And because I am grateful, I choose to offer you what you once denied me: dignity in desperate circumstances. I do not deserve your mercy. Perhaps not. But mercy is rarely about deserving, is it? It is about choosing to be better than our worst impulses." The Marchioness extended her hand. "What do you say? Will you work for me? Truly work, not as penance, but as a fresh start?" Charlotte took her hand, gripping it with desperate gratitude. "Yes. Yes, my lady. Thank you. I will not disappoint you." "See that you do not. Mrs. Aldridge will show you to your quarters and explain your duties. And Charlotte?" The Marchioness waited until the other woman met her eyes. "Everyone here knows who you are and what you did. You will face judgment from the staff. You will have to earn their respect through actions, not words. It will not be easy. But if you truly commit to changing, to being better, you will find that this household rewards genuine effort." After Charlotte was led away by Mrs. Aldridge, the Marchioness returned upstairs to find Edmund waiting in the corridor. He pulled her into his arms without a word, holding her close. "You are extraordinary," he murmured against her hair. "I am not certain I would have been so generous." "I am not being generous. I am being strategic." She pulled back to look at him. "I have learned something these past 3 years, Edmund. The best revenge is not to crush your enemies. It is to rise so far above them that they become irrelevant. And then, when you have that power, to choose kindness anyway. Because that choice, that demonstration of mercy when revenge would be easier, That is what destroys bitterness at its root. You think she can change? I think everyone deserves the chance to try. You changed. I changed. We all changed. Why should Charlotte be different? The Marchioness smiled. Besides, Mrs. Aldridge will work her hard enough that she will not have energy for making trouble. And if she proves herself, if she genuinely tries, then perhaps she will find redemption. If not, then we will have lost nothing by trying. Edmund kissed her forehead. How did I ever survive without you? You did not. You merely existed. We both did. But now we live. That is the difference. They stood together in the hallway of Stanhope Hall, listening to their daughters giggle in the nursery, knowing their son would be home for the holidays in a few weeks, with Charlotte beginning her new life in the still room below. The house that had once been a monument to grief had become a testament to transformation. 5 years later, the Marchioness stood in the garden of Stanhope Hall, her hand resting on her swollen belly as she watched Henry, now 18 and home from Cambridge, teach his younger sisters to fly kites. Edmund approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her, careful of her pregnancy. Another one, he said softly, his hand joining hers on her belly. We are going to run out of rooms. Then we shall build more rooms. We have plenty of space. We do. He kissed her neck. How are you feeling? Enormous, tired, gloriously happy. She leant back against him. Who would have thought that day I walked away from this house that I would return to become its mistress? That I would bear your children and raise your son and find more joy than I ever imagined possible? I thought it. From the moment I saw you in that workshop in London, I thought it. I just needed time to convince you. You convinced me by changing, by becoming the man you were always meant to be. They stood together, watching their children play, and the Marchioness thought about the journey that had brought them here. The cruelty and the courage, the humiliation and the triumph, the moment she had chosen dignity over desperation and walked away from a tyrant, only to help that tyrant become a man worth loving. Charlotte Thornfield emerged from the still room, carrying a basket of herbs and tinctures she was now tasked to manage. In 5 years, she had transformed from a bitter, manipulative woman into a valued member of the household. She still worked under Mrs. Aldridge, but the Marchioness had quietly arranged for her wages to be supplemented, had created a small trust fund for her retirement. Charlotte did not know about these arrangements, would not know until she was too old to work, and discovered she had enough to live comfortably. That was cruel, Edmund had teased when the Marchioness explained her plan, making her work without knowing she is already being provided for. It is not cruel. It is kindness disguised as consequences. She needs to work, needs to feel useful, needs to earn her place here. But I will not allow her to face destitution in her old age. There is a difference between justice and vengeance. I choose justice. Now, watching Charlotte tend the herb garden with quiet competence, the Marchioness felt satisfied with that choice. The woman who had tried to destroy her was now part of the household that thrived under her guidance. Not as punishment, but as proof that second chances, when genuinely offered and genuinely accepted, could heal even the deepest wounds. Henry called out, pointing at his kite as it soared higher than the others. Rose and Lily cheered, jumping up and down with excitement. Edmund laughed, the sound rich and warm, so different from the cold, bitter man he had been when the Marchioness first encountered him. "Do you have any regrets?" Edmund asked quietly. The Marchioness considered the question seriously. She thought about her father's fall, her time of poverty and desperation, the 2 weeks of humiliation at Stanhope Hall when she had been nothing but a target for Edmund's cruelty. She thought about the courage it had taken to walk away, the fear of accepting his offer to return, the scandal their love had caused. "No," she said finally, "not one, because every hardship, every moment of pain, every choice that seemed impossible at the time led me here, to you, to our children. to this life that I love with every fiber of my being. How could I regret the journey when the destination is this perfect? Even the part where I made you rewrite letters 7 times? She laughed. Even that. Because that cruelty showed me who you were at your worst, which makes appreciating who you are at your best all the more meaningful. You did not give me pretty words and empty promises. You gave me truth, however ugly, and then you gave me change. Real, genuine, lasting change. That is worth more than any easy romance. Edmund turned her in his arms, careful of her belly, and kissed her with the tenderness of a man who knew the value of what he held. I love you, Georgiana Thornfield. Every day I love you more than the day before. And I love you, Edmund. Not despite our history, but because of it. Because we are both proof that people can change, can grow, can become better versions of themselves when given the right motivation and the right support. That evening, they gathered for dinner as they did every evening when Henry was home. The table was loud with conversation and laughter, with Henry recounting his adventures at Cambridge, with the girls interrupting to share their own news, with Edmund and the Marchioness presiding over it all with quiet joy. After the children were in bed, after the house had settled into peaceful silence, Edmund and the Marchioness sat together in the library where their story had truly begun, where he had been cruel and she had been desperate, where everything had changed. "Do you remember," Edmund said, "the day you quit before I could fire you? I remember everything about that day, the way you went pale when I told you I had already resigned, the satisfaction I felt at taking back even that small piece of power. I deserved worse. You did, but you changed. That is what matters. Not what you were, but what you chose to become." Edmund pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the moors stretched dark and wild under the stars. Inside, Stanhope Hall glowed with warmth and life and love. "You told me once," the Marchioness said softly, "that I was the bravest woman you had ever known. But I think we were both brave, Edmund. Brave enough to face ugly truths, brave enough to change, brave enough to love when love seemed impossible. That is the real story, is it not? Not about a tyrant and his victim, but about 2 broken people who saved each other." "Yes," Edmund agreed. "That is exactly the story, and it is far better than any fairy tale, because we had to fight for it. Every day, we had to choose each other, choose kindness, choose growth. Nothing was given, everything was earned." They sat together in comfortable silence, 2 people who had found their way through darkness to light, who had learned that the deepest love often grows from the hardest soil, who understood that second chances are precious gifts that should never be wasted. In the still room below, Charlotte Thornfield finished her evening tasks and retired to her modest room. On her small table sat a letter from her estranged sister, the first communication in 5 years, willing to meet for tea. Beside it, a small gift from the Marchioness, a new shawl for winter, with a note that simply said, "Thank you for your hard work." Charlotte held the shawl and wept, not from sadness, but from gratitude, profound and unsettling. The possibility that even she, who had been so cruel, so vindictive, so consumed with bitterness, might find redemption through patient work and genuine change. Above, in the master bedroom, Edmund and the Marchioness prepared for sleep. He helped her out of her gown, his hands gentle, devoted, on her body that had already given him 3 children and would soon give him a 4th. She turned in his arms, this man who had once made her feel worthless and now made her feel cherished beyond measure. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me a reason to come back, for changing, for loving me." "Thank you," he replied, "for seeing past the monster to the man, for believing I could be better, for loving me anyway." They climbed into bed, and Edmund held the Marchioness carefully, protectively, as he did every night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to choose kindness over cruelty, growth over stagnation, love over fear. But tonight, they simply held each other and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From desperation to dignity, from cruelty to compassion, from broken to whole, from "you are dismissed" to "I choose you every day for the rest of my life." That, the Marchioness thought as sleep claimed her, was the truest fairy tale of all. Not the one where prince saves princess, but the one where two imperfect people save each other and build something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. And in the morning, when she woke to find Edmund watching her with eyes full of love, when she heard her children's laughter echoing through the halls, when she looked out over the Yorkshire moors that had once seemed so bleak and now seemed full of promise, the Marchioness knew without doubt that every hardship, every humiliation, every moment of despair had been worth it. Because this, all of this, was worth everything. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this journey from despair to hope. If this story of courage, transformation, and love that conquers cruelty touched your heart, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories that prove second chances are real, that people can change, and that the greatest revenge is choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier. Together, we keep these stories of resilience and redemption alive.